Good afternoon. I'm Quinton, Mayor of Kansas City, and wanted to talk to you about public safety, but public safety in the broadest sense, relating to the fact that once and for all, Kansas City Council, the Mayor's office, and others are asking for true accountability in terms of how safety is done in Kansas City. By way of background, and some have asked why would we do something like this? By way of background, I was born in 1984. Since that time, roughly 4,467 Kansas Cityans have been murdered. That is more than the Americans that were killed in Afghanistan. That's more than the Americans killed in the war in Iraq. This has been the greatest disappointment, the greatest challenge for our community for generations. And time and again, we've always had the same answer. And that answer has been simply more funding to the police department, more ideas of officers, and we're not looking at creative, innovative, and truly structural changing ways that we can address violent crime at its root causes. And what I'm saying today, what my council co-sponsors are saying today, is no more. We need to make sure that we are actually addressing accountability, that we are making sure that we have a police department that is talking to and listening to our community. We need to make sure that we have the sort of accountability that we have for our city bus system, our city public works, and so many other areas and categories. A few points I'll make in connection with this. The Missouri legislature requires us to fund 20% of our police budget, our general revenue, to the police department. 20%. It's about $153 million. And in addition to that, we're required by state law to fund about $40 million in pension obligations. Now, last year, the Kansas City police budget was $238 million, so exceeded that by roughly $45 million. We're introducing two ordinances today with myself and 8 co-sponsors, all of the council members in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th districts. And the ordinances will do the following. Ordinance 1 will reduce the Kansas City Police Department budget to the statutorily required amount. Ordinance 2 will then create a separate fund known as the Prevention and Community Services Fund. And it allows in that ordinance the city manager to negotiate a contract not to exceed $47 million. If you've been doing the math, that is actually just about the amount that was cut in Ordinance 1. That $47 million, i.e. not to exceed, is funding that we would like to see spent on things like prevention, intervention, the root causes of violent crime. Why do we care about all of those? Well, what we're doing right now ain't working. It's not just an answer enough to say get more law enforcement. Last year, during Operation Legend, we brought hundreds of federal agents to Kansas. Not we, the federal government sent hundreds of federal agents to Kansas City, and we still broke a homicide record. We still had too many non-fatal shootings in Kansas City. We had too many challenges along the way. And so we hope through this reallocation, still with the Kansas City Police Department actually, we get the one thing that I think the public expects. When I go to a community meeting, when Councilwoman Shields goes to a community meeting, they ask, what are you doing about crime? And it's not enough for us to shrug and say, well, we gave more money this year, hopefully it'll work out. Once and for all, we have to say a few things more than hopefully it will work out. So what is this and what is this not? If you're following along, this is not defunding the police. What this is actually increasing accountability for the first time in 80 years for the Kansas City Police Department and the Kansas City Council and the Kansas City Mayor. This will be going to committee next week in the Finance, Governance, and Public Safety Committee. We're not in a rush necessarily other than to say that we want to make sure we can make these determinations here in Kansas City and not just defer to Jefferson City to come up with solutions to violent crime that have nothing to do with actually solving crime in Kansas City. This year in the Missouri legislature, we saw bills about police residency. We saw bills about police budgets. We heard a bill about driving over protesters. What did we not have? More money for prevention, more money for intervention, more money for conflict resolution, more money for mental health services. And if Jefferson City won't help us on that, then we will do it ourselves. That's what you're seeing today. I hope these ordinances, they have enough sponsors to pass. I do hope they pass. I hope they pass swiftly, and I hope the police department meets with us in a fair and collaborative way to say how can we actually fix our long-term violent crime problem. Since the 1980s, and probably before, we've had a department that said we need more officers to fix X or Y. But we still have a lot of murders in this city. We still have too many tragedies and families in Kansas City. And that's why you're seeing us make what I believe is the most transformative change in public safety in Kansas City that we've probably seen in 4 generations. I'm proud of the step that we take today. I know there will be more challenges and more questions. There will be some who say, why do we even highlight, for example, the fact that there is enough funding opportunity here, if the Board of Police Commissioners wants to work with us, to fund a recruiting class. But what's important? They need to make sure they're working with us. They need to make sure they're collaborating with us. We also look forward to having an opportunity to interact more regularly with how we can keep this community safe, and not just talk to them in connections with blog posts or other things where they tell us what they need. We want to actually act like the elected officials that we are here in Kansas City and have an opportunity to say these are important priorities for the people of Kansas City. A few other things I note, and then I'll take some questions. All we're asking for is engagement. All we're demanding is engagement. For the last year, people of Kansas City have said a few things. We want our community to be safer. We want to have a positive relationship with law enforcement in our community. We want them to listen to us, hear from us. We want everyone to do better. Well, this is us recognizing that we must do better and we can do better as a city, as city leadership, and as a police department. $47 million is not actually a lot if you compare it to the full police budget and the full budget of Kansas City. And we're asking for just a percentage of accountability. A percentage of accountability to make sure that we can do what the people have asked us to do. Represent their interests, make sure we're looking out for them, make sure that we're listening to black and brown voices, and make sure that when we look to solutions to violent crime, they're solutions that people in Kansas City, that taxpayers in Kansas City, that citizens of Kansas City have voted to support. Not just priorities from those who live outside Kansas City, seem not to like Kansas City, would love to pass laws telling us what to do every other day. That's all I have for now. We'll take any questions.
Mayor, you mentioned the word defunding, and that's a hot button term right now. Can you get into that a little more and address the critics who will see this as trumped up defunding?
I think the ball is in the court of the Board of Police Commissioners and the Kansas City Police Department. The City Council is laying out approach. I'm laying out approach that gives an opportunity for the police budget to be exactly the same, if not slightly increased. All they have to do is work with us. All they have to do is listen. All they have to do is report back to us what they're doing to enhance public safety, and particularly to enhance public safety in a way that allows for accountability to the public, accountability to the actual public, not just accountability to 5 people the governor likes or 4 people the governor likes and me, right? Accountability to the public, and importantly, looking at ways that we can work to enhance our prevention, our intervention, our mental health services, so many other areas that are core and obvious to Americans about how we can make our community safer. That's all we're asking for. And in fact, I read the chief's blog the other day, and what did he mention? Other than mentioning a recruiting class, he mentioned the Police Athletic League, he mentioned crisis intervention teams, he mentioned social workers. Wonderful things. Well, let's make sure we have a commitment to that is enshrined in a contractual arrangement between the City of Kansas City, Missouri, and its police department. Let me make one other point. This may seem novel and this broad change, but it's really not. The City of Kansas City already actually has contractual arrangements with the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, the Economic Development Corporation of Kansas City, and I'll be darned, the Police Department of Kansas City to handle parking enforcement. This is no different. And that's why this is, I think, completely something that is within the confines of Missouri law. It makes good policy sense and allows myself, Councilwoman Shields, so many others, to finally say, when people are asking, what have you done this year to try to make our community safer? We can say more than we passed a budget. Instead, we actually get to do the work that people expect us to do. I don't see these ordinances as taking money from the police department. I see these ordinances as creating an opportunity for the police department to work with us, and to come up with at least a bit of a budget where we're collaborating together, where we're in alignment on priorities and issues that are important for Kansas Cityans. As we say, I was just on the phone with a city council member who was actually wondering, why aren't you doing more aggressively in connection with a budget reduction? Here, all we're doing is actually saying, we just want to know what's going on. We just want to make sure that we're including the public in this discussion. And if you want to include the Public Police Department, Board of Police Commissioners, we'll work with you to make sure you have the exact same, in fact, a slightly increased budget to do the very things that the police department's asking us to do. Social workers, crisis intervention, mental health services, new recruiting class. So I don't see this as a reduction at all. In other cities, you have seen clear reductions in budget line items that are moved to different departments or totally different areas. That is not the issue here. We're directing the city manager to negotiate a contract not to exceed a certain amount, but that would be with the Kansas City Police Department itself. So what this is really about is not defunding, it's about accountability, and it's about doing better. And if you're somebody like me who wants to see fewer homicides in Kansas City, if you're somebody like me, and I think every Kansas Citian I've talked to who wants us to be safer, then this is, to me, an appropriate and reasonable choice. And for a Kansas Citian who is wondering why would they do such a thing, ask yourself this. Do you think that this is a city that's as safe as it can be? I think the answer is no for all of us. And this is one tool that we're using to make sure that we are as creative as we possibly can be in looking at situations and ideas like prevention and intervention, like the former No Violence Alliance, like all of these things where we recognize it takes an entire community to come up with long-term public safety solutions. There's always pushback because, there are a lot of people that want us to actually cut the police budget by a lot more, not create an opportunity for us to negotiate a way where we're getting back to, I think, some sort of balance. In fact, an increased budget for a recruiting class, among other things. This is not what we're doing. Instead, I think what we're trying to say is, how can we work together collaboratively? How can we make sure that there is accountability? And how can we make sure that the city council, the mayor, the elected officials of Kansas City have some voice in helping this city become a safer place? And so to the extent that there's pushback, I'm sure there will be pushback in different ways. There will be some who erroneously say that this is a violation of Missouri law, which it's not. There are some, and the reason it would be is because Chapter 84 lays out in the revised Missouri statutes that the Board of Police Commissioners directs all police activity. That's great. But just like our parking enforcement contract, we can enter into contracts as a city that says we'd like you to enforce parking downtown. We have done that. We and the police department have done that. The city council and the mayor of Kansas City, I think a majority of them are very interested in saying, how do we get back to the same budget position, but making sure that we respect and recognize the priorities of Kansas City. Make sure we're being creative, collaborative, and accountable. I'd love for us to get there. But if the Board of Police Commissioners tells me and the city council to pound sand, then I guess we'll be in a different budget situation. So the question is for all of them. Well, I think actually just this week, and I read the chief's blog and I read all types of things, there have been questions about funding for things like additional classes. There have been questions about whether there was more funding for the police department and our American Relief Plan, etc. So I actually think it's a wonderful time because we are talking about long-term planning, funding issues in Kansas City. This also, I think, I'll note, I would have liked for the Missouri legislature to have taken the opportunity to try to find a way to help enhance public safety in Kansas City. And instead, I think they largely just looked to find a way to reverse generations of rules and tradition here in Kansas City. That's their prerogative. This is ours. And so I think that this creates a positive time for us to try to look at a new way that we can evaluate our relationship with the police department, including an opportunity to get that new recruiting class that I've heard is so imperative. And I would say the ball is in the court of the Board of Police Commissioners, of which I'm one vote of 5, in saying, and I would hope that very swiftly, they would enter into a contract with the city council and the mayor of Kansas City so that we can make sure that we have officers on the streets, but that we're also looking at creative ways to address violent crime in Kansas City. Well, there are a lot of things I don't know. There's some things I do know. I used to teach contract law. And very simply, if there's a breach of the contract, then I guess there would be certain remedies. One of which is certainly the funding choices that are made by the city council the next year. Another would be perhaps some sort of remediation where they actually follow through on those types of demands that we've seen in the contractual arrangement that we've had. I would hope, of course, that if we entered into an agreement, then they would be certain to follow it. The problem right now is we largely don't have that in almost any way other than kind of the picayune issues like maybe parking enforcement or some other small things. Right now all we do is just say, hey, here's $250 million and I hope you kind of do stuff that we like. I mean, it's very interesting. You've seen the city council a few times. We passed a resolution a few weeks ago about the types of training videos that can be used. But what we usually are doing is just saying, pretty please, we beg of you that, you try to do something that's a little different. I think it's important for us to actually move beyond that and say if we're going to exceed the statutorily required 20% threshold, which we have done consistently, I think because we recognize the importance of public safety, then we need something from you. We need you to make sure that you're working with us, that you're listening to us, that you're listening not just to our voices, but the voices of those in our community. There are a lot of folks that say, yeah, I like my police officer, I like my police department, but I want to make sure that if there's a budget challenge, the first thing that gets cut is not a community interaction officer. Or if there's a budget challenge, the first thing that gets cut is not the police athletic league. These are the sorts of things that we want to make sure that we're working towards. I think it's actually just fundamentally fair. It's fundamentally fair that Kansas Cityans can actually get some expectation of accountability for a significant budget line item that they have each and every year. And let me go one step further. I absolutely believe that the current situation and framework that we're in does violate the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution of the United States. We don't need to pick that fight today, but the reason is very simply this. Kansas Cityans are told that they have to spend a certain amount of their budget. They can have no control over it, but somebody in Grandview or Grain Valley or Gladstone has no such restriction. I don't think that there's a rational basis for it. I don't think that if you look at the modern era, there's any basis relating to corruption or anything like that that is an ongoing reason for that. And so what I would say to anyone who thinks that this is in some way legally questionable, actually welcome a legal challenge, because that would allow us to articulate some of our own concerns about the bizarre setup that we have in Kansas City. I think that's what we can get in some ways from this discussion, but by and large, I would expect that if somebody enters in an agreement with us, that they would be willing to stand by their word in connection with that agreement. You know, every year we trust a city manager of Kansas City to make funding decisions for about $1.7 billion, minus $250 million of it. Right? Whether it's an airport, which has lots of rules, a KCATA contract, which has lots of rules, we trust our administration to do that. And if for some reason they're flawed, then we get mad at them and we can fire the city manager, or the voters eventually can fire us. I think public safety shouldn't be divorced from that conversation. And so we're going to trust the same administrative structures that we have for everything else that exists right now to make sure that this additional up to $47 million is spent well, is spent with good oversight, is spent with good collaboration. Our city manager, not just this one, but his predecessors, had wonderful relationships with our chiefs of police, and I expect that to continue to be the case. But I also expect it to be the case that city council and the mayor get to ask more about what's going on. They get to say, we think that this is actually important. We think prevention's important. We think that better intervention services are important. Re-entry services are important. And so that's what the oversight of this sort of fund is. I'll make one other point. We certainly could always elect to increase it in the future. Increasing it not just for the police department, but for also other services that may provide public safety in Kansas City. You've seen lots of other cities find ways to invest in other ways that you can have alternatives to enforcement. Enforcement alone isn't our solution to everything that we're working on, and so that's why I think you've seen this fairly impressive and aggressive activity. It's not every day I introduce an ordinance where we have 8 sponsors. You need 7 to pass, so this is 9 actually, me plus 8. And I think it shows that City Council wants to actually be a strong partner with the police department, with our community groups, and so many others in making Kansas City safer. And that's what I think we'll see after this ordinance is passed. Thank you all so much.